How am I doing, Michael? I want to introduce you. We got two Michaels lined up here. I just looked down here and said, how you doing, Michael? And I got two nods of the head. Back in 1994, I met our next speaker. And you talk about the fight that Shaw has gone through. This guy, when Al Gore came back from the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio, Al had in his hands a treaty for sustainable development. Sustainable development. Hate that word. And he had it all lined up that the Senate was going to approve that treaty. And Bill Clinton was going to sign it into law. Did you see that map? There's a map like that of the entire of United States of America. And you know who put that map together? This guy right down here. And you know what he did with his map? Just as the United States Senate was getting ready to adopt that treaty, this guy marched to Capitol Hill. He's a one-man gang. He started showing that map to senators, and one by one, they said, we don't want that to happen to America. And they shelved the vote with minutes to go. Literally minutes to go. They shelved the vote, and it's never happened again. Would you welcome Michael Coffman?
Well, thank you. I always enjoy coming back. I live in Maine now, but I was born in Southern California, born and raised. And every time there's an Eagle Forum conference that I'm invited to, I feel like I've come home, and thank you. I'm going to end this evening with a word of hope that God is very much involved in all of this, and that all we need to do is be obedient. Tomorrow I'll scare you to death, but tonight I will give you a message of hope, because we need hope right now. You don't know how close we are to the precipice of utter and absolute disaster in this country. What you hear in the media, even on Fox News, isn't even scratching the surface of how much danger we are in. And I'll explain some of that tomorrow. But I wanted to start out tonight with a message of hope. I'll be talking a little bit about this tomorrow as well. Duffy mentioned the fact that I did this map and actually used it on the Senate floor to stop a treaty. It was an hour before the treaty was scheduled for cloture vote, which would have been followed by the ratification vote. And I want to show you what happens and how God can actually work. For a number of years, I have a PhD in ecosystems analysis and global warming, so I can talk equally on both issues. And I had been following what was going on in an organization called the IUCN. I'll explain more about it tomorrow, but the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, was an organization that was created in 1946 after the United Nations was created in 1945. It was a scientific advisor to the United Nations. It writes all of the environmental international treaties. And it wrote Agenda 21. It also was the author of the global warming issues that we've been fighting here the last several years, biodiversity, the urbanization, all of everything. I'll explain more, and so will Mike tomorrow morning. Everything that Mike is fighting right now basically is wrapped up in this, and it was actually started back with the Club of Rome in the 1970s. And a guy by the name of Stephen Rockefeller, the son of Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York, shepherded it along from the Club of Rome through the IUCN and eventually into the United Nations. And it was designed basically to import a socialist form of government on every nation in the world. That's what its intention was. with absolute totalitarian control over human life. Mike is experiencing that. It's happening almost everywhere that we have urbanization, because the urbanites have been the longest that have been dumbed down in our public education system. It's in my new book, Plundered. Nonetheless, I'd been following this in the 1980s. I knew that they had developed what is called the Wildlands Project, and I'll show you what that means in a moment. But they also wrote the Biodiversity Treaty, or the Convention on Biological Diversity. 1992 rolls around, Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit, and the treaty comes out to introduce to the world. President Bush signs it and takes it back to the United States. Of course, then President Clinton took over the next day, or the next year, and he created what is called the President's Council on Sustainable Development. I'll tell you more about that again tomorrow. But the key factor is that they came out with a document called Sustainable America that now implements Agenda 21. Both Mike and I will talk about that tomorrow. But the really important thing that I want to mention tonight is that this treaty was to be ratified in the U.S. Senate. It was voted out of the Senate Foreign Relations, yeah, I guess it would be the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's getting, that's a long time ago. It's starting to get a little dusty. With a 12-1 vote to ratify. And they hadn't even seen it. Well, the treaty itself was an 18-page treaty. There really wasn't much to see. It was basically a statement of motherhood and apple pie. And how could you vote against sustainable development? I mean, you are some sort of ogre, I guess, if you are. And as a consequence, what we did then is I went down to the Senate and talked to the key leadership and told them that this was a very, very dangerous treaty. It was a sleeper. But I couldn't prove it. I didn't have the smoking gun. And that was in July of that year. In August 3rd, Senator Mitchell, the Senate Majority Leader at the time, put it on the calendar that it was going to be voted on the 10th. And this is how God works. When I saw this, I realized, it wasn't me. There's no way it could have been me. I sent out a fax alert, one-page fax alert, bullet statements and so forth, plus this little map that we were talking about earlier. Sent it out to 4,400 people to help them understand the danger. These are people that I knew would be interested in this, as well as organizations. What I did not expect was this result. I was hoping a few of them would call in and at least get some of the senators' attention. Hillary Care was going on at the same time, so they were sidetracked on that particular issue. And Mitchell thought it would go right through. I mean, every indication was, afterwards I found out they had spent $3 billion greasing the skids to get this treaty through. And of course, I didn't know that at the time, being dumb. I figured, well, we might be able to do something. And I sent out this fax alert to 4,400 people. 10 o'clock the next morning, I got a call from the Senate Foreign Policy Committee, the Republican Senate Foreign Policy Committee, and asked me what I was doing, because my phone number was on that, and somebody had forwarded it to them. And I said, well, I was in there a month ago, talked to you that this was a dangerous treaty. I'm just telling people that it's a dangerous treaty. Call their senators. And they said, well, you're doing a very good job. We're getting thousands and thousands of phone calls. Well, that wasn't even the beginning of it. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I got a call from Senator Mitchell's office. I had talked to him and a staffer of him a month before, and she called. She didn't even identify who she was, and she said, call off your dogs. That was the first words out of her mouth. And then she introduced herself, and I said, well, what do you expect me to do at this point? There's no way I can do that. Why? If it's really doing that much good, I'm not about to call off my dogs. And she said, well, we're having a problem here. There are so many phone calls coming in that it has collapsed the computer-driven phone system. And they couldn't bring it back up, because as soon as they did, it would go right back down again. Now, of course, the Senate has other phone systems in there, but not for you and I. That number is for you and I. And I said, well, that's good. I'm glad that's happening. Maybe it'll show you that this is a dangerous treaty. I didn't have any idea what was going to come. The next day, she called back, and she says, you have to do something. And I said, well, why? She says, every time we bring back the phone system, it collapses again. It happened for 3 days. Now, you can say that that was because of the 4,400 fax alerts that I sent out. Well, yeah, it was. I mean, that was the start of it. But there is no way that I did that. That's a supernatural phenomenon, because she told me at that time that for that to happen, 2 to 4 million people have to call in. 2 to 4 million people. And it convinced Mitchell at that time, I mean, he was up to his eyeballs in Hillary care anyway, that this was not the time to do this. And I talked to him one more time and told him he had to get what is known as the Global Biodiversity Assessment. And I'll share with you some of the passages out of that tomorrow. It's enough to curl your eyeballs. It's the most anti-human document I have ever seen published by a government. It is unbelievable. But anyway, I said that it's supposed to be in that document. It's supposed to be, according to the contract, here's the contract of the United Nations that signed this document for the IUCN to write this document. It was supposed to be finished in March. This was now August, at least in draft form. And Mitchell needed to call the United Nations and get this document because they would not even acknowledge it to us. I had met several people down on the Hill when I was there in July, and we kind of formed a group of effort to try to get this thing stopped from ratification. We eventually formed Sovereignty International from it. But the key was that Mitchell did call and was told by the United Nations that the document does not exist. They have no intention of writing it. Well, here's the contract. Nonetheless, that's what the United Nations told him. He went back. Hillary Care was eventually defeated. In September 27th, he announced that he was going to again put the vote up for cloture, and then the ratification vote on the 30th of September. In the meantime, one of the other fellows that I had kind of joined forces with thought that he might be able to get this document out of New York, because he knew someone who has a good contact with someone who works with the United Nations, not for the United Nations, but with them on various issues. That person could not. And then again, this is how God works. Understand this, because I had no anticipation that this was going to happen. That woman who worked in New York knew somebody in England that worked even closer with the United Nations and thought that that person could get it out of the United Nations. That person could not. But she knew someone in Bonn, Germany, that probably could get it. And of course, that person couldn't get it either. Now, by this time, who we were was lost in the translation to these various people. And that person in Bonn, Germany, knew someone in Gland, Switzerland, that will have it. Why? Because Gland, Switzerland is the headquarters of the IUCN. Are you beginning to see what's going to happen here? Those people had no idea who we were. None. They thought we were an environmental organization. This is the 28th of September now, 2 days before the vote. We had actually issued another fax alert, and it did get a tremendous response, but nothing like the response we had the first time. And by this time, they were kind of prepared for it. So, you know, what works one time won't work another time. But anyway, that person called whoever their contact was within the IUCN, and said that this was an environmental organization or environmental group that needs to have this to help get this ratified. So the IUCN FedExed it overnight express. One chapter was 400 pages long. That was a key chapter. I'm telling you, it was unbelievable when you read it. I could spend 3 hours giving you quotes from this document, and it would literally just scare you to death. But nonetheless, we got it, and we divided it up into 100 pages each and started to read. This was the morning of the 29th. And I will share with you some of the things that I came across when I had my section of that particular document. And when it came time, I found the smoking gun, because on page what is now 949, I think, on the final document, it was to be based upon the Wildlands Project, and had the citation there just as I had told all of these senators when I was there in July. There was the smoking gun. When I found that, we set that down along with a map that was about 80% complete of this. I had been drawing it for 2 years. I have a PhD in ecosystems analysis. I have worked in almost every major ecosystem in the United States over my career. There isn't anybody else that could have done this but me. And I didn't really understand why I was drawing it. I just felt compelled to draw it. There was no market for it. You know, we were doing this kind of a business, and people, you know, people don't like to pay for bad news. And so we were just kind of limping along financially. So, but I was putting my efforts into this even though I saw no financial reward from it, because I felt God was leading me to do so. And came the 29th of September, 1994, and we sent that document underlined and noted for the Republicans, along with a copy of that map. And that map was taken out on the Senate floor at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The vote was scheduled for 4. And it literally brought everything to a standstill. And if you take a look at that, there's a bigger copy in the back wall right there, and I'll show you some more of it tomorrow. But the red areas that you see right here are wilderness areas. No human use. This is according to their instructions as to how to find what these reserves and corridors would be. I have the PhD. I was able to do it very easily. And about 80% of what I thought would probably happen is happening now, almost 20 years later. The yellow area that you see on there are buffer zones where only very limited human use can be applied. And you just heard Michael talking about the fact that his land is designated. He can't use it for anything because it has to be some sort of a reserve, or what did they call it? Wildland. Yeah, there you go. Right. These people are crazy. I will give you some evidence of that tomorrow. But because they're crazy and because they're in control of our political system, our education system, our judicial system, and our media, they're extremely, extremely dangerous, because they don't have a clue what they're doing. They think they do. They think they're the brightest people on planet Earth. But they don't. My whole book, Plundered, really defines that problem. But the key factor is that through a series of, I think it can only be described as God events, we're able to stop the ratification of that treaty, and it has never been brought out on the Senate floor again. Ever. And I can only attribute that to God's intervention. As we face this next several months, coming months before the election, I would admonish all of us that we have a responsibility as citizens of this country, because we have the liberty and the freedoms still to become active and participate in the political process. And we have to do that. The time to turn off the TV is now, and the time to start laying down shoe leather for one of your candidates. It could be the local commissioner, county commissioner, town council, or whatever the case might be, or state assemblyman or congressman. You have to pick someone who you trust and think will bring the kind of constitutional principles back to our government and make it happen. I am very proud of you and the many Tea Party and so forth of what you did in 2010. But it now has to be amped up, because we need to take back our state, our Senate, our Congress, the state legislatures, as well as our county commissioners and so forth. There are ways that we can protect ourselves from government intrusion while we take the time to solve these problems. But if you do what you feel like you must do, that God is calling you to do, even though you don't understand why, you can make a difference. You may never see the difference. I was very fortunate. I saw the results of what I had done. Most of the time, we never see it. But if we really focus on changing this government back to a constitutional government, we can make serious inroads this November. I am confident of it. And with that, I think it's probably a good place to conclude. Thank you.